Ladies and gentlemen, gather close and heed my words, for today I share a cautionary tale from the records of our vast Imperium, the Harlequins. These are not mere performers or jesters, as one might find in the courts of ancient terror, but rather they are the elusive warriors of the DALL-e, dedicated to the laughing god Kegorach, and masters of manipulation both on and off the battlefield. Engaging with a Harlequin is stepping into a dance of shadows where truth and falsehood blur. Alliances are as fleeting as the whisper of the wind, and where one's very perception of reality may be turned upon its head. While often laced with wisdom and insight, their words are tools crafted with the precision of the finest artisan, designed to mislead, beguile, and serve their inscrutable ends. Sit and listen closely, for we must be ever vigilant against the beguiling charm of the Harlequin's whispers. The gift of hope. Commissar Calundresque walked back and forth within his austere cell. Stripped of his black greatcoat, peaked cap and bolt pistol, he still exuded an air of authority, evident in his upright posture and unwavering gaze. Even the most oblivious of troopers would recognize him for what he was. However, no one was present to face his piercing stare. They had departed nearly an hour earlier to assemble for the impending ritual, informing him of their departure before leaving. Their tone was almost apologetic, as if they sought to explain a perceived breach of duty to him, perhaps seeking his approval. Dresque might have offered a grim chuckle at the notion if the situation hadn't been so grave. Instead, he glanced at his wrist chronometer. Minutes remained before the ritual commenced. Once more, he traversed the limited space of his cell, his thoughts racing. Yet, he could discern no viable means to avert the impending event. "God Emperor, forgive my shortcomings," he muttered into the oppressive silence. Not silence, never silence, not anymore. The monsters had taken that away. Even in this moment, their distant shrieks, howls, malevolent laughter, and ominous promises echoed on the scorching winds. Commissar Calundresque walked to the window, its iron bars offering a view from the commandant's fortress. He gazed beyond the fortress's curtain walls, surveying the chaotic swarm of unclean legions churning like a nightmarish sea below. The deafening roar of guns reverberated through the air, showering fire upon the besieging hordes. Explosions illuminated the battleground, revealing brass-clad siege towers and grotesque amalgamations of metal and fire as they advanced toward the fortress walls. "At least there are still soldiers holding the battlements," Dresque whispered. "At least we're still putting up a fight." But for how much longer? Dresque shook his head, a heavy burden of guilt and desperation weighing on his shoulders. He knelt on his cell's cold stone floor, his hands forming the sacred sign of the Aquila over his breast. In this moment, he began to speak earnestly, offering a confession that only the God Emperor on Terra would hear. "As it should be," he muttered under his breath, seeking solace in the act of penance. "God Emperor, forgive me." Dresque's voice quivered with genuine remorse. "I tried to make them see." He paused momentarily, the haunting cries of some grotesque abomination outside the fortress walls interrupting his words, but he pressed on, knowing that time might be running out. "It was the relentless deadlock," he confessed, his words a desperate plea. "The endless, brutal attrition of battle, spreading feelings of hopelessness and despair, and the isolation. After the darkness fell, many feared we were cut off, even doubting the sanctity of Holy Terror itself. I executed several for their faithless words, yet the whispers persisted. And then they came, the heralds of chaos." He whispered the last words, unable to speak them aloud, even in this sacred moment. It wasn't a lack of strength or resolve that silenced Dresque's wavering tongue, nor was it fear. It was a profound revulsion, a refusal to utter the unholy truth they represented. Dresque would not sully the air with the vile names of those abominable beings. They came, and the war began. He continued his confession, his voice filled with desperation and pride. "O God, Emperor, I pray that it made you smile to look down upon us and see how we fought." He felt a surge of fierce pride as he recalled the indomitable human spirit, standing firm against horrors that seemed to come straight from the pages of Scripture. But that pride was tinged with sorrow as he remembered the losses, the defeats, and the slow retreat despite their unwavering resolve. Then, "Hopeless deadlock," he said, his voice heavy with resignation, as if he were recounting a nightmare he could never escape. Dresk glanced at his chronometer, its ticking marking the passage of time. He felt a strange stirring in the air, the atmosphere thickening and becoming charged. The ritual must have begun, and he knew he had little time to make peace with the God Emperor. The fighting dragged on cycle after cycle, turning after turning. Dresk continued. His voice was heavy with the weight of the past. "We, of stout heart, fought on regardless, but the mutterings grew worse. It was said that the astropaths couldn't call out to the Imperium for help. Soldiers whispered that the warp raged. 'We are abandoned,' they said. Some openly claimed we were doomed, and not all their voices could be stilled." He paused, a deep sadness in his eyes. Then came the manifestations, spreading through our ranks like a plague. Mutation and madness were bad enough, and my bolt pistol sang its hymns of obedience almost as often as the regimental priests. Worse were the witches. How could so many appear in such a short time? Was it the beings beyond the walls? Did they do this to us? Dresk's voice trembled with anger and sorrow. Honest, Emperor-fearing men and women manifesting unholy powers as though from nowhere. Never mind that they gave us the edge in battle more than once. It was heresy, and I was forced to punish it as such, over and over again. As he continued his confession, Dresk heard a bell toll, its mournful sound resonating strangely in the fortress. It left him with a persistent ringing, and the room seemed to brighten unnaturally. Dresk's frown deepened as he wondered if this was the end. He closed his eyes and spoke on, his words tumbling over one another in haste to confess. His voice filled with desperation and remorse. "When the alarm sounded that day, God Emperor," he began, "I ran with pistol and blade in hand, my warriors at my back, for I truly believed that the foe had breached the walls. Instead, I found the Xenos surrounded by staring soldiery and half the fortress's senior command. None could say where they had come from, but they spoke High Gothic with remarkable clarity and claimed to approach under a flag of parley." He described the alien beings in detail, their strange appearance and shifting masks, the heretical black and white bodysuits they wore. "God Emperor, I would have struck them down then and there and gone back to the walls." Dresk continued, his voice heavy with regret, but the commandant, he listened to the Xenos. He entertained their lies. Dresk recounted the Xenos' words, their claims of a familiar foe in chaos, and how they offered to help harness the psychic malaise spreading through their ranks. They spoke of it as a tech priest might strengthen the signal of a faulty Vox set. They offered us a crystal of great size and said they would teach us the ritual of its activation. They told us it would focus our energies and allow us to cry for aid. They offered us hope. The confession weighed on him as he revealed this dark turn of events, his voice shaking with the knowledge of what followed. Dresk's distress grew as the tinnitus whine intensified, filling his cell with an unbearable noise. He winced and tried to alleviate the discomfort by working his jaw, but it had no effect. The light in the room continued to swell, casting an eerie glow that bathed everything in its radiance. He could feel the blood on his fingertips where he had pressed them to his philtrum. He knew this had to be it, the culmination of his dreaded ritual. Dresk had vehemently warned against trusting the Xenos, even attempting to provoke a confrontation by drawing his pistol and aiming it at one of the masked beings. His intention had been to save his superiors from damnation, but he had become ensnared in a bewildering and disorienting maze of prismatic illusions before he could fire. The next thing he remembered was the blunt force of a las pistol striking his temple. Now he found himself confined in this cell, awaiting whatever grim fate awaited him. Dresk's voice grew hoarse as he continued, the taste of blood in his mouth now accompanied by the agonizing rise of the wine into a piercing wail of pain. Despite his discomfort, he pressed on, recounting the Sinos' desire for hope that he, nor the regiment's priests, could provide. The soldiers yearned to feel powerful in the face of the horrors that surrounded them, and the Xenos had exploited that need. As the wail in his ears intensified, it became a cacophonous scream, not of a single voice, but a chorus of countless damned souls that invaded his consciousness. It melded with the ever-rising, soaring crystal note that continued to torment him. In a fleeting moment, Dresk saw through the eyes of another being, assaulted by erratic images of figures emanating white fire from their eyes and mouths. The fiery essence flowed into a trembling crystal that blazed brighter than a star. It dawned on him that this searing light would obliterate them all. The daemons, the Xenos, and every living being caught in its devastating path. The Xenos had disappeared just as abruptly as they had appeared, leaving only their gift behind. Dresk watched in horror as waves of white fire emanated from the fortress's walls, purging the demons from the land. He realized this fiery energy was now enveloping him, dancing before his lips and spreading along his limbs like a burning corona. Gasping for breath, Dresk pleaded for forgiveness from the God Emperor as uncontainable psychic power surged through him, consuming him from the inside out. The screams of agony filled his mind until it felt on the verge of shattering, overwhelmed by the searing fire that consumed his flesh, his bones, and his very soul. As the white psychic fire consumed him and unbearable agony tore through every fiber of his being, Dresk realized that the Imperium would indeed hear their message, just as the Xenos had intended. It would be a final deafening cacophony of screams from this accursed world. And behind those screams, faint but inescapable, the Imperium would hear the mocking laughter that echoed in Dresk's mind, even as he burned, the laughter of the Xenos who had orchestrated the annihilation of them all.